Okay, hello everyone. Just please give me 2 minutes because we still have a lot of folks coming into the call. Okay. So thank you everyone for being here. It's really nice to see many really good friends in the call. Long time no see. Welcome everyone. My name is Soledad Bogliano. I'm working with ETC Group, and we are here today to share for the first time one of our most recent pieces of research. This one developed by our dear friend Jim Thomas in the context of a project that ETC Group shares with the Center for Global Digital Justice and IT for Change to develop further our understanding of the points of entry that we need to dive deeper to really understand the context in which digital justice needs to be worked further in its intersections between digital justice and biodiversity, digital justice and food sovereignty. So just before we start, one small housekeeping announcement. We have interpretation to English and to French. Tenemos interpretación al español y al francés. Pueden usarla tocando el botón de interpretación. You can use it pushing the button for interpretation. And yeah, we don't have much more to say. It's a real pleasure to have you all here. And so we will hear from Jim first with a presentation. And after the presentation, we will have a round of comments and of questions that will help us build better the direction of what we think would be the possible takeaways in terms of further research, new questions, and possible strategic pathways that we need to follow with this new perspective that Jim's going to share. So please, Jim, you have the floor. We cannot hear you, Jim.
Yeah, no apologies for that. I just want to first of all check that everybody can. I'm gonna show a slideshow, so I want to make sure everybody can see that. Hang on a moment. Great. If I speak like that, can you hear me now? Yeah, super. And hopefully everybody can see the slideshow as well, because I'm going to be showing some slides. So thank you very much for this opportunity to present this case study that I was asked by Etc. Group to write, looking at generative biology in the emerging area of AI bio. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Uh, as well as this being part of a bigger process with the Global Digital Justice Forum. I've also been involved in the last year and a half or so with a fellowship from the European Artificial Intelligence and Society Fund. And so a lot of the research that went into this came from that fellowship. So I really want to thank the European AI and Society Fund for making much of this initial research possible, as well as the Global Digital Justice Forum and Etc. Group. And I also really want to particularly thank Professor Saira Mian from the University College in London, who's also been incredibly supportive in finding data and so forth for this. So that's just where this is coming from. The study itself is up on etc Group's website, and I think that's been shared already. But would encourage people to look at that. It's a fairly short case study, and just to say a little bit about where it comes from. There has been reports. I authored a report for the African Centre for Biodiversity and others about 2 years ago, I guess now, called Black Box Biotech, which began to look at what is this area of generative biology and some of the questions that it raises. There was an excellent report that was done by Save Our Seeds, looking specifically at the application of AI and generative biology to plants and crops. And the hope here was to dig a little deeper into understanding exactly how this industry is coming together, what is the market structure and so forth. So as civil society, we can begin to understand where the implications are for justice and for the environment and so forth. I want to say just something about the title. I'm going to talk a little bit about the underlying technology that's being used here in generative biology of so-called large language models. And we use the term large looting models to point to the fact that artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence, requires a massive amount of theft. And this isn't a novel intuition. Just last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago, Naomi Klein was tweeting that she thinks artificial intelligence, she and Astra Taylor think it should be called theft tech. And we've seen movements, especially of artists and writers, who have been pointing out that all generative AI is theft. It really lays on the bedrock of theft. So the looting is quite significant to this business model. Important to make that visible from the beginning. I think many people on this call are familiar by this time with what artificial intelligence is and what it's not. It is predictive computation. It's the sort of high intense computation and sorting of data with algorithmic tools and so on to find patterns, make predictions, including predictions that are then used to generate synthetic media, synthetic text. Um, it's not, and I just feel it's important to say this every time we talk about artificial intelligence. We're not talking about thinking machines or intelligent computers or computer sentience or artificial general intelligence or super intelligence. These are science fiction ideas that are being used for marketing, but there's no ghost within the machine here that's becoming intelligent. The word intelligent is really a misnomer. Synthetic biology is kind of another one of those marketing terms that's become significant in the world of genetic engineering. And really it's a term that very broadly applies to new techniques and approaches in biotechnology, where engineering metaphors and digital approaches are being applied to try and transform living systems, to redesign them, to create novel sequences of DNA, RNA, proteins, and so forth. There is a definition from the Convention on Biological Diversity that you can see there. What I found interesting as I began to head into this work of understanding how the generative biology industry is coming together is that the industry actually prefers. Sorry.
Sorry, are we supposed to be seeing your slides?
Yes, can you not see them?
No, we are not.
Okay. Let's see what happened there. Maybe they're not sharing. Let me try again. Hmm. Um, Let me see if I can share them again. Can you see them now?
Yeah.
Yeah, great, super. Um, and the interestingly, the industry, the synthetic biology industry likes to use this term AI X bio for where the worlds of artificial intelligence and biotechnology are coming together. And that includes generative biology, but it also includes other things that I'll talk about in a moment, and how artificial intelligence is changing the way we do genetic engineering, biotechnology. Generative biology, this term that was using in the title, talks about a specific set of tools that attempt to modify the genetics of living organisms to create novel DNA, RNA, and other biomolecules, redesign metabolic pathways and things. It's about biological redesigning. Um, and again, there is a quote here from Future Markets, who call generative biology this combination of computational techniques, artificial intelligence, and biological data to design, optimize, and create novel biological systems, materials, and molecules. And I'll explain a little more of the distinction between what generative biology refers to within the bigger category of AI x bio. I'm just gonna, sorry. Um, so the within the sort of area where genetic engineering is meeting artificial intelligence, there's a number of sort of different areas that you could almost have a taxonomy, and we do that in this report. One is generative biology, the bio design through artificial intelligence of new organisms, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But it's worth also seeing the other things that are in this area. On the one hand, we have artificial intelligence is being applied to laboratory work. AI is able to do machine vision, and so we have also increasingly automated laboratory work, as well as the introduction of sort of AI for science tools like uh, Microsoft and Google are producing AI scientist tools, which assist a scientist, in this case a genetic engineer, in coming up with hypotheses and sorting through data. So this is also within this sort of AI tools and lab automation, different from redesigning the genetics of organisms. Another area where I think there's an overlap is what we call cyber physical systems. When we talk about cyber physical systems, it's where we have bigger real world systems that incorporate digital aspects to them, and in this case, also biological aspects. So a very clear example is in digital agriculture, where we see a company like Innosense. Innosense has genetically modified crops like soy so that they fluoresce when they don't have enough water. And then that fluorescence can get picked up by AI systems in order to spray those crops. So that system has both biological and AI systems in a sort of bigger cyber physical system. And then a sort of fourth area of the taxonomy is biocomputation. And this is really an emerging area as we reach the limits of doing computation in silicon, etching on silicon chips. There are various approaches to, can we do computation in living things? Can we use brain cells as computers, for example, so-called brain organoids? And there are companies like Corticoid, for example, who have produced living chips that are able to do AI processes, but they're not silicon, they're made out of brain cells. And so this so-called organoid intelligence. And so that's another area where we have this merging together of artificial intelligence and living organisms. These are things I'm not going to talk about in this presentation. But the kind of core idea behind generative biology is that we can use AI to redesign the genetics, the codes, if you like, of living organisms. And we can do it in much the same way that we're using generative artificial intelligence, generative AI, to create novel texts or to create novel pictures, or even now with Sora, with novel videos. So if you take a generative artificial intelligence program like ChatGPT, which has been trained on as much text as it can get hold of, and you say, write me a poem about a dog, it will do that. And we'll talk in a second about how it does that, and it will output, or appear to output, a novel poem about a dog. Or if you ask Midjourney, which has been trained on many millions of images, draw me a picture of a dog, it will appear to draw you a novel picture of a dog. And so in this case, with generative biology, where the artificial intelligence has been trained with as much DNA, RNA, and other biological information as possible, the idea is you can say, design me a protein or design me a piece of DNA, and the AI will once again produce a novel protein or piece of DNA or RNA or whatever. That's the theory behind generative biology. What's going on in the background of these generative biology processes?
Sorry, just speak slowly as the language is complex and we have to interpret it. Yeah,
Of course.
thank you.
What's going on in the background uh, of these so-called generative biology are what we call large language models, and similar things as other similar types of models, um, which basically create a model of how all the data that it has seen relates to itself. And that model, which is created through something called machine learning, is then prompted. Um, and the model tries to spit out a prediction of the answer you would want. So in the case of ChatGPT, which is for text, the model has seen how different words relate to each other. It's created a model based on those relations. And then when you ask it a question, it analyzes your question, your text, and then it tries to predict what sequence of words will most likely satisfy you as an answer based on what it's seen. Um, these, about a third of the time, is wrong. It puts out things that aren't factually true, but they look impressive. And I think Emily Bender and Alex Hanna have called those synthetic media extrusion machines. I think that's a very useful term. They're predicting what sort of media they should arrange, how they should rearrange media, and then presenting it to you. And a very similar system is what we use with predictive text on your phones, where it tries to predict the next word that you're trying to type. And this is effectively predictive text on steroids. And in the case of large language models, it requires incredible amounts of material, whether that's text or pictures or videos, as its training material to try and get closer to something that's a more accurate prediction. And without that massive theft of those underlying data, those underlying samples, the system wouldn't work. So it absolutely relies upon taking as much data as possible. And so the idea now is that you have these systems where you can say, make me a protein, and it looks at all the protein data that is being fed, and it comes up with a protein that will hopefully satisfy you, or make me a genetically modified organism, and it will come up with a DNA sequence that will do so. Just to sort of get clear what the shift that's going on here is, if you think about the example of art, we used to have a experience in art where an artist who had certain skills would make the artwork. That's sort of the analog approach. With digital tools, you could increasingly have support from sort of digitally assisted production of artwork, and so the artist became more of a designer, with the support of the digital tools. And now you have auto generation of images where you just have to say, you prompt, I want a picture of cats in uniforms, and it will produce it. So the role of the artist to designer has now moved on to the prompter. And that's kind of what we're seeing now with the use of AI in genetic engineering. We've moved from the sort of artisanal lab creation of genetically modified organisms to the digitally assisted design. That was really what synthetic biology for the last couple of decades has been about, using digital tools to assist that design, through to potentially having this idea that the AI will just be prompted to produce the protein that you ask for. You don't need to necessarily have the knowledge of how to do that design work. probably the single program or application that's really driven this field furthest forward is AlphaFold by Google or Alphabet, and their DeepMind AI lab. And basically, this was a program that looked at, or an AI application that looked at how you fold proteins and how the way in which a protein folds is linked to its sequence. And there's been international competitions and whole PhDs where scientists try to work out why a particular sequence, a protein sequence, folds into a particular shape. And to make long story short, Google was able to produce this AI that could do that folding and win those competitions, and ultimately was able to use this DeepMind AlphaFold to sort of show how any known sequence folds into a particular shape. And for that, they actually won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in fall 2024, just the quickest time that group of scientists have won a Nobel Prize for something. And it was claimed that they'd solved this protein folding puzzle. They'd opened up a sort of new universe in how we could fold novel proteins. I should just point out that there's some caveats in all of this. Although DeepMind is seen as this incredible step forward for science, sort of automated AI science, there are protein folding scientists who caution that it still doesn't explain why you get the folding that happens. It just shows connections between them, and that there are classes of proteins that DeepMind cannot fold. So this is a little overblown, but of course it's still significant. But off the back of it, we now have a range of different companies with names like Generate or Evolutionary Scale and Cradle and Zyra, who are saying not only will they use this to show how a protein folds, but they can create new novel proteins. And so this is the beginning of a generative biology that you could ask for the protein that you want, what characteristics you would like, and these companies will manufacture it for you as a novel protein. And it's not just in protein. This is now happening with creating novel strands of DNA, novel strands of RNA, gene editors. You have a company called Profluent who are generating through AI new gene editing like CRISPR, but other type of things. And outside of DNA and RNA, all the epigenetic parts, the parts of genetic systems that aren't hereditary, are also being engineered using these AI systems. And we're seeing the beginning of programs where you could say, I want the full sequence of a novel virus. So earlier this year, so we have a model produced by the ARC Institute called EVO2. EVO2 is like a kind of chat GPT foundation model for living organisms. That's how they try and present it. And it's trained on pretty much all of the genetic data that they could get hold of. The ARC Institute's interesting because it's set up by this tech billionaire, Patrick Collison, and his wife, the head of Stripe, but also has a lot of money from NVIDIA, who you may know as a major AI company. And just a couple of months ago, they announced that they generated a number of new viruses. These were bacteriophages, where the entire genome had been created by the AI. So they're saying, we've now be able to sort of ask the AI to make a genome that will make a working virus, and it did. It produced several of these. So this is, and in this case, the bacteriophage is something that could be used as an antibiotic. So they're presenting this as a potential way to make new antibiotics. Just to say that this institute, the ARC Institute, which holds EVO2, is one of a sort of rash of these new philanthropically funded institutes that are backed by extremely wealthy AI tech overlords. The Ellison Generative Biology Institute, part of the Ellison Institute in at Oxford University has also just got started. Ellison is the head of Oracle, who for a hot minute, about a month ago, he was the richest man in the world. And they're also trying to develop generative biology tools. And just at the beginning of this month, Mark Zuckerberg and his wife announced that they were moving a large part, or even maybe most of their philanthropy over to this new biohub, which is going to focus on using AI and biology models to cure disease. And they claim that they're going to cure all disease by the year 2100. Apparently, that's what Mark Zuckerberg and his wife are going to do using generative biology. And of course, there is not just work on viruses, there's also work on crops, which I mentioned Save Our Seeds have been doing really interesting research into, and also Test Biotech. One company that's doing this work is creating models is InstaDeep, who have a model called AgroNT, and they're using these AI models to redesign poplar, potatoes, maize, and so forth. So for this for this case study, the question certainly that drove me was why? And why are these tech titans, whether it's Oracle or Microsoft, NVIDIA, Stripe, why are they getting into this area of generative biology? What's going on in the marketplace, and what does that mean for everything else? And to try and understand that, the way I went around that was to first start sketching out what they call the stack, the kind of basic business model that drives this industry. So first of all, you can draw up the stack for artificial intelligence, and some of the companies we've heard of, like NVIDIA or Google, or Oracle, for example, are part of a sort of network of companies that work together. And and a company like OpenAI, who make ChatGPT, specialize in the model. The models, of course, are very important, and you have both these what are called foundation models, these sort of big overarching models, and more specific models within that, where there's AI applications. That's the sort of model vertical of this stack. But then you've got companies like NVIDIA who provide the compute, provide the machines, as well as the cloud companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, who provide the cloud, the large amounts of computation and data. And then, of course, behind that is the infrastructure of data centers and so forth. But on the all of this runs on data. You cannot have generative AI without massive amounts of data coming in. And so that's an important part of the stack, is the collection of data. In normal generative AI for media, that means from social media or from other sources. And of course, all of this needs finance and it needs government support. So this is kind of a rough sketch of the Gen AI stack, not for generative biology.
Jim,
Yeah,
would you mind trying to make it full view, your PowerPoint,
yeah,
that we
sure.
can read the detail of
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
wording in the stack?
Let me see if this is hang on a
I
sec.
think it's presenter view, no?
Try. Can you see it there?
No, we can
No,
see
that's all
very
right.
big now.
Um, slideshow. There we go. Is that okay? Hopefully you can see that now.
No, we can see you now. It left.
Jim, there's no presentation anymore. The slides are no, it's just slides.
Yes, I hear you. Let me go back to share. Okay, so hopefully you can see the screen, and then I will try and do view. Like that. Can you see that?
Nope. We lost the presentation again, Jim.
Presentation again. Yeah.
I think it's in the bottom of the options. The options at the bottom of the screen. Yeah, now it's it.
Now it's perfect.
Now it's perfect. Okay, great. So here you see the sort of, you know, as I say, the stack, as it were, of normal generative AI. And out of this, I tried to work out what is the stack for the GenBio, for generative biology, and recognizing that there's really kind of a flow. That in order, before you can even get to the machines that work out the new designs for you, you first have to access the data, the biological data, and organize that. So there's a whole side of genetic resources on the left, and then on the right, there's a whole side of, you know, if when you have a machine that shows you a picture, you immediately know if that picture is good or bad. But when you're talking about living organisms, you have to actually implement it in a cell or in a crop. And so there's a whole bioengineering part of this stack as well. And you'll see that, of course, in the middle of this is the AI stack. We still need to have the models. We still need to have the computation. We still need to have the infrastructure behind the computation, like the data centers. And you do need to have the data. In this case, it's the databases. And I'll talk about that in a second. But there are definitely parts of the stack that are novel and different from how AI usually works. So the obvious one is the genetic resources. The data in this case is the DNA data, the RNA data, the protein data. And while we have these databases, these large, what are called digital sequence information databases that do have this, the industry desperately needs a lot more of this data. So EVO2 is trained on 9.3 trillion nucleotides from 128, I think it's going to be 1,000 million genomes. And according to, you know, some of the players in this area, those aren't very useful data. They're very small, skewed, stagnant databases. They're made up of sort of what happens to have been looked at in the past for science projects, but they weren't ever collected or designed for AI. And so they're very incomplete. They're very biased. They don't have context. There's all sorts of problems with that existing digital sequence information. And when you hear generative biology entrepreneurs talking, it's the data that most concerns them, because if you have bad data coming in, you're going to have terrible outcomes coming out. And so they uniformly say what they need is better and more data. And that means increasing the collection of data, which is to say bioprospecting, whether that's through collecting eDNA, so-called environmental DNA, from personal genomics and health data, and other sorts of bioprospecting activities. There needs to be a massive increase in bioprospecting to get this better data that they say they want. A second thing that you see when you look at this model is you need to turn the living world, the wet world, into data. And then you need to turn the data, the outputs of the model, back into living organisms again. And so we're on this point of wet-dry translation, is how the generative biologists call it. They sometimes call it the beach. It's where wet meets dry. And so there's points at which you either are sequencing data or you are trying to take the outputs and engineer them into organisms, are very important points. And particularly on the sequencing side, the genetic sequencing require a lot of sequencing capability. So it's not just that we need, like all AI, a lot of computation. You also need a lot of sequencing, and you're also going to need a lot of DNA synthesis, turning digital outputs into real DNA. That's sort of an additional thing that needs to happen here. And of course, you also need to have labs. You can't just have a DNA design that comes out of an AI computer and it won't have any effect in the world. You need to have labs that are implementing that in crops or in bacteria or whatever. And that is itself a whole large piece of infrastructure. And one of the things that the generative biologists I spoke with insisted on is because within synthetic biology, you have what's called the design, build, test cycle. The test part is really important. You have to keep looping back as you get results from making this. That goes into the models and improves the models. So there's a kind of a feedback that's extremely important. This isn't going to be a fast process. You have to keep improving your model with the results of what it produces. And that, again, makes this complex. The reason I'm pointing to all of these things, every one of those is incredibly expensive. Those of you who follow the AI industry, generative AI industry right now, knows that that industry is spending about $10 trillion on infrastructure build out right now, just for first generation generative AI. If you're going to add to that generative biology and pay for the labs, the sequencing, the synthesis, the data grabs, this is going to become an incredibly expensive endeavor. Which again asks the question, why are we seeing these large tech companies moving into this if it's going to be so incredibly expensive? So then the question I was asking was, so where's the value? Where do they think they're going to derive money from this? So the first place where there's value are the products. Everyone who's in this industry claims that the money's going to be that this will create drugs, that this will create biofuels, that this will create new materials and so forth. And particularly, they're very focused on drugs. The hope is that using generative biology, you're going to create blockbuster drugs, pharmaceuticals, which ultimately are cheap to manufacture and will create massive amounts of money. So just this week, Lilly became the first trillion-dollar drug maker because of weight loss drugs such as Mounjaro. And so they're hoping to repeat the idea of hitting a blockbuster drug. And so many of the generative biology firms, the startups, are positioning themselves as either drug discovery partners, and in one case, Isomorphic Labs, which is Google's own generative biology company, is starting to test its own drugs in-house, although in fact this doesn't seem to be moving forward as fast as they initially said. They're pointing to the fact that in the drugs world, you have what they call Erome's law, the opposite of Moore's law, that despite putting more and more money into trying to find drugs, you're getting less and less drugs coming through the pipeline. And they're hoping that doubling down on generative biology will be a way to break through that. There is some companies who are working on natural products. They're saying maybe we can use this to design things like vanilla or stevia and other natural products for food and cosmetics. The clearest example here is Arzeda. Arzeda was started by David Baker, who was one of the co-recipients of the Nobel Prize along with Google DeepMind. And they already have a product on the market, which is a type of sweetener, a stevia. It's not that the stevia itself is made using generative biology, but they made an enzyme which transforms stevia into a different version of stevia. So there is a hope that they'll be able to create natural products this way. But I think it's really important to notice that the very first companies that tried to use synthetic biology for natural products, like Amaris, Evolva, Solizyme, have all failed. All of them have gone bust. And this points to the fact this is not going to be a very profitable area either. When you try and work out where is the value in all this, one place where the value seems to be is in the data, the collection of data. We have a company called Basecamp Research who are making their whole business model collecting the data for the AIs and what they call the data supply chain. And they're working with communities and they're working with national governments and national parks to start once again doing bioprospecting, large-scale bioprospecting, and building up a very large database of digital information, digital sequence information that can be used for genetic engineering. They claim that their base data contains more than 10 billion genes and that it's larger than all the other digital sequence information databases combined. It's not only kind of a whale of DSI, it's really the Moby Dick of DSI. So they're very much trying to make themselves a big company with lots of investment based on collecting data. So the value to them is the data, and the more data they collect, the more they can get investment and ultimately sell themselves to Google or Microsoft or someone like that. So the value is the data. They claim that they're going to share monies back to the communities, but I think there's real problems in how they're structuring that. And then the other place where I think there is value is for companies like NVIDIA. NVIDIA, you might remember, are a company that sells chips, AI chips, and they very much want to sell AI chips into science, to big science, and to convince big science projects that they need to do AI. And so they're actually funding a lot of the generative biology companies. And they very much stand to benefit by selling more of their GPUs, that's their chips, to do big generative biology. Basecamp Research, who I mentioned before, told me that they have the largest NVIDIA cluster in the UK because the size of data that they're dealing with, genomic data, is far larger than the sort of size of data that you get even from social media and so on. And so for NVIDIA, this is a potential for a whole new future revenue stream. And in a way, this is also true for companies like Google or AWS, Amazon, because they, as cloud companies, they hope to keep selling the storage and the processing of data. And talking of Google, I think one of the real values right now is the public relations. At a time when artificial intelligence is seen warily by much of the public, where they don't really see how chatbots and image generators are doing anything socially useful and are causing all kinds of harms, such as environmental harms, being able to say you're going to make drugs or that you're going to be able to make new materials that deal with climate change is a huge PR win. And we already see, for the Nobel Prize being given to DeepMind, this has been held up and shown as like AI doing something meaningful in the world. Demi Hasibi, who's the founder of DeepMind, says that in just 10 years, he expects to eradicate all disease using generative biology. This is clearly ludicrous, but this kind of PR is very powerful for the AI industry. We've been here before, actually. It's worth remembering that in 2000, when the Human Genome Project was announced as having been solved, Bill Clinton and Craig Venter stood up and said, within their lifetime, we would see the end of all diseases. The number of cancer deaths would go to 0 within their lifetime. We would see the end of diabetes and Alzheimer's and so forth. And this hasn't been the case. It hasn't been the case because it was never so simple. And the promise underlying genomic answers to disease was the wrong promise. But we've seen this kind of hype, and a lot of money was generated for pharmaceutical companies mostly. And then the other place where we really see money in this is the military and security. There's a very strong narrative that we need, because you can produce using this, you can produce bioweapons and biotoxins, the military has to invest very heavily in getting ahead on generative biology. And we've seen, for example, the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotech in the US arguing that there needs to be a major investment by government in creating a generative biology industry to get ahead of China. And just 2 days ago, Trump signed this new scientific discovery executive order for the Genesis mission, which was about putting large amounts of US national money behind exactly this. So this is about public funds for building a generative biology industry in the US under the rubric of security and defense. And as in much of what's happening in AI right now and biotech, this is really where the money is. It's public money. Because one thing I would point to is in some ways, the shift to trying to bring AI and biotech together is driven by desperation. We have an industry, certainly the biotech industry, and in some ways even the AI industry, that hasn't produced very meaningful products, that hasn't produced the big breakthroughs they promised, and are desperate for legitimacy and approval. And all the spending that's happening right now in the area of technology is happening on AI. And so biotechnology companies have to rebrand themselves as AI companies. That's the only watering hole in town if they're going to get funds. So it's kind of what's going on here. I just want to end by touching on some of the implications of all of this. One implication is for those of us who've looked at biotechnology and its impacts, we now have to add the impacts of the AI supply chain, the massive use of water, the massive use of electricity, the minerals that have to be taken. All of that now becomes part of the cost of using genetic engineering and biotechnology. But most significantly is that underlying all of this is this massive take of genetic resources. That when NVIDIA, working with the Arc Institute, says we took all the DNA data, both DNA and RNA data that exists, and we trained a model, and now we can ask it for anything, what they mean is we stole it. None of that data, nobody who ever gave any of that genetic resources thought that they were providing what the world's most richest company the ability to create AI models on this. And so it's straightforward theft. And none of this, of course, is going back to the communities that this was taken from in any meaningful way. Once biological information is made digital, it becomes in a whole different economic category and very hard to get restitution back to those who it was taken from. That this is a certain kind of biocolonialism, and even companies like Basecamp Research, who are offering to give pennies to communities if they end up using their data, are really only giving pennies. This is a classic set of colonial relationships. There are real concerns around what this means for safety and biosafety. On the one hand, as we know from AI media, you get what are called hallucinations, that these systems create mistakes. And it's one thing to have a mistake in a picture or a mistake in a text. It's another to have a mistake in a living organism or a virus. And as Test Biotech recently showed, working with Save Our Seeds, it's also possible using these systems to design genetically modified crops, for example, that could have just the least number of changes such that they evade regulatory oversight. In new European regulations around gene editing, if you have less than 20 changes, 20 base pair changes, it evades having oversight. And so it's possible to create GMOs that are under 20 base pairs, but still are, for example, herbicide tolerant, which has significant environmental impacts. So this could be used to design organisms that escape regulations. And it's important to bear in mind that we're going to see deepened militarization of biotech, particularly with this new announcement from the Trump administration. In the report, we talk about some of the places where civil society can take action on this. There has been work ongoing in the Convention on Biological Diversity, particularly around the question of digital sequence information, and that artificial intelligence companies need to be properly caught into the decisions about that and made to pay up and be responsible. But also there is an ongoing program of work on synthetic biology, on assessing and monitoring synthetic biology, and the question of AI has come up there quite a lot. There is work under the FAO. Right now, many of our friends are in Peru, in Lima, at the meeting of the Seed Treaty, where once again these questions of digital sequence information, how AI is being used for re-engineering crops and taking materials, that's under discussion. But also the Committee on World Food Security is planning to have an intersessional meeting on AI and food and agriculture. And these questions about generative biology should be at the heart of that. And I think there's an opportunity also where countries have national privacy laws, because the data that was taken for one use, maybe in scientific studies, sometimes health data, is now being reused for another thing, which is to say, to train these AI programs without any permission from those who it was taken from. And so there's an opening here to use privacy law potentially. I'm going to end there. I hope there's some space and time for us to talk about this. And thank you once again to Etc. Group for the opportunity to give this presentation.
Thank you so much for this presentation, Jim. It was amazing. I'm seeing a lot of clapping hands everywhere. I'm happy everyone has enjoyed it. We have planned for a few minutes to allow for comments and questions from the audience here. So I would like to invite everyone to take the floor if you have questions for Jim or comments and takeaways that can help the broader collective to see where we move forward from here. Please, Angelica, take the floor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you see me and hear me? Hi, Jim.
Loud and clear, yeah.
Yeah, fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. Very enlightening. I have the thing that came immediately to my mind when you were kind of casually going over that portion of actually creating products, as I would now want to bet most of us here in this group are being trained to think of in terms of genetic engineering, and just said they all failed, and it's so to create new plants, new living organisms, okay, not just enzymes and cell cultures and whatnot, but living organisms that can sustain themselves or exist in the real natural, in the wet and dry environment. And I find it, be interested in your comments or thinking, because it is what's being sold to us, of course, in order to buy acceptance into this, are these products, is that end, that, like you said, in the medical field is like curing cancer and diseases. In the agriculture field, or in that field I'm working in, it's products that do the same thing, just in the environment, just in agriculture. We won't have pest problems anymore. We won't have nutrients problem. We won't have disease problem, all of that. That is not happening, okay? And you have been saying that, but kind of on the side. And you said, if I understood that correctly, it's been realized in the business world that this is not a very promising route to go. So the money, I agree, and you and I had long discussions about this already for a long time. Where's the money being made? With all the promises being made, the money is made somewhere else, and there is a decoupling of the process from the product going on. But the product needs to be kept up as a smoke screen to promise to the lowlifes like us, keep investing, keep giving your data on top of that, from the farmers, the biologists, you name it. Keep giving your data, because we'll solve your cancer, we'll solve your food problem, we'll bring you tangible products out there you can put your hands on, and that will make your life better. That's not work. I'm interested in whether or not that message has really penetrated that field. I'm looking for that evidence. As you know, we're screening that field as well. And secondly, the second part is missing here. Why is it not working? Why is it nearly impossible? My prediction is, and people don't necessarily like me saying that it will never be possible, because the science this whole thing is rooted on is false. And that's why they're going more and more into, like, IT world, a highly artificial world, reductionist, maximally reduced systems like pathways, tissues, because they will not be able to produce any of the products out there that they're promising, because the science, the understanding of the genetics and how it works is false. So that I never hear, and I'd like to have your thoughts on the, is it really so that in the business world they begin to understand that, and they're even misleading us more, because all the deregulation pushes we see in Europe and we see also in Africa, everywhere, is building on the promised products, which you basically say they know already they're not going to be able to deliver it. So have we entered like a new level of deceit here, basically? You see what I'm getting at? Okay, sorry for taking
Thank you, Angelica. Jim, is it okay if we take 2 or 3 questions and then you go back? So I have Ms. Leonida Dongo, then Marian, and there's a question by Ankita in the chat. So Leonida.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for this space. I have a question to Jim, particularly about the CFS having a meeting on AI and food systems. I've been participating in the negotiations as a member of the civil society and indigenous peoples mechanism. So my question is, what should the civil society organizations that participate directly in the negotiation process do, particularly in relation to the upcoming meeting of the CFS? What intervention should we put across? Because we know that it's going to have negative implications for our food systems. And from next year, the CFS will be talking about building resilient food systems. So what are some of those interventions that we should put forward? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leonida. Marian, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Jim, for online interesting conversation. And also, I mean, this is a whole new area for us. My question is in line with what Leo just said, but differently. I mean, I come from a continent where we're going to be dumped with this technology. Oh, I know. We're going to be dumped with this technology. Our youths will use our water, our land. I mean, it's whatever they need is going to come mostly from Africa and all that. And then you have our leaders who always want to follow to be like other nations, especially when they feel there's going to be money inside. And I have these questions of, I know that very soon your organization will start saying we shouldn't use AI. So are you saying AI is very bad? There's nothing good about AI already. You people use it, and of course, some of us use it for, I mean, in our daily work, Google and everything. If you try to Google anything, they will send you to AI. So you're seeing that you're already using it. And also, don't you think AI can help us, I mean, get good, I mean, in treatment, in agriculture to help, I mean, when there's diseases or droughts or something, they can predict it. I mean, this man rolled out a whole line of things that AI can do. So I'm looking for, I mean, what kind of, I mean, arguments can we present? Because I see it as a silver bullet that it can really help. I mean, predictive, it's very concise, and that, I mean, and they have this funny idea that AI has a mind of its own and it's not going to be controlled by the creators of this AI. So what ready answers, I mean, maybe it's good to have maybe like an executive summary of what ready answers to give our governments before they jump into this bandwagon. Thank you so much.
Shall I answer a few of those, Soledad? Is there time?
Yeah, may I read the question posed by Ankita in the chat? From your perspective, what might be some levers to redirect this type of technology from grassroots innovation, assuming the cost overhead of tech can be lowered? Are there ways in which you think the generative AI tools can be appropriated for non-extractive efforts?
Yeah, I think.
So you have the floor, Jim. Again.
Yeah, I think
sorry, please. Jim, before you answer one thing, I was recently in the meeting, the CLP in Addis Ababa, and this girl from Morocco was, I mean, I don't know, packaged to come to talk to all of us, that if we are saying we can have our own African AI, is anything like that? if we want to contest that this thing is being imported, we can have our own African AI. If you can also answer that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the last two questions are somewhat linked. So my own personal view is that there's almost nothing redeemable about generative AI as it currently exists. That in order for that system to work, you need a level of extraction, whether that's extraction of energy, of water, of minerals, and of course of data, that is just deeply unjust and antisocial. And I think it's a very steep curve to try and transform that behemoth into something that would be acceptable to principles of food sovereignty or principles of just transition, in the way that it's very difficult to turn large-scale nuclear power or space lasers or something into something like that. I feel that generative AI is a class of machine, massive machine, and it requires so much power and capital that I don't think it's a useful conversation to talk about how do you make it grassroots. There are interesting discussions about other types of AI using small models, and can we develop small model based AI? And I think that's interesting, but I don't think generative AI fits that. And I think particularly, the thing that you just said, Marion, about, well, we can create an African AI. If that's the case about creating generative AI, let's look at, generative AI is being controlled and has devolved down into just 4 or 5 incredibly large companies. In fact, the wealthiest companies in history, pretty much. NVIDIA is it was recently a $5 trillion market cap. This is not something that even Europe is struggling to try and create a European AI. Pretty hard. I don't see Africa from a standing start with no investment money or resources doing that. So this is a highly colonial technology and kind of always will be. And so how do we use AI? How do we use other technologies that are damaging? Some of us still get on airplanes and we still travel to things where it's strategically important to do so. With AI, is it strategically important to use AI for something? If so, we weigh that against the massive amounts of water, minerals, energy, theft of people's material, the harms that it's done, and decide for ourselves, is this something that we want to engage in? I don't think it's about personal decisions. It's about, this is a structural question. I don't know if that answers Ankita's question about how can we redirect it. I think there's different types of data technologies that are useful, and generative AI, including generative biology, is probably not one of them for grassroots development. I do think, and to finish off on Marion's question, what do we say to governments? I think as a movement we have to come together and think about that. There is going to be a gathering in Zambia at the beginning of May of movements who are from food sovereignty movements and climate justice movements and others. We're calling it the Earth Not Cloud Gathering, to think about how as movements we can take on AI across its many harms. So that might be a space where we think about what we say to governments and what we say to each other. In terms of talking to governments, I think Leonida's question about what do we do very, very specifically in the case of the Committee on World Food Security taking on this AI and food and agriculture topic, that's obviously, I think somebody put it in the chat, that's for the CSIPM and particularly the data working group of the CSIPM to really engage with. I think there is an opportunity to raise the harms, to raise the concerns, because peasants and indigenous people and civil society have a say in that space, that we can begin to talk about real governance over this. But we need to act quite quickly and organize to impact that meeting that the FAO are pulling together. And this links to the next meeting, the next roundtable on digital ag as well. And then in terms of what Angelica posed, I learned so much from you, Angelica, and I think you can say it far better than I ever can. I don't know if the industry is necessarily learning that they continually fail because they fundamentally have a problem with this, the metaphors behind this technology. What I do observe is that, when we see these large tech companies, whether that's Google or Microsoft or Stripe or so on coming in, these are not companies that understand biology, and they're driven by those metaphors without knowing those metaphors are unhinged. So we're now seeing incredible amounts of money moving in to so-called generative biology from people who have no biological understanding whatsoever, and certainly don't have the history about how genetic engineering fails and fails and fails. And so, yeah, it's, as you say, it's unhinged, and it's increasingly just a big speculative bubble. I think that's why I was trying to point at the data as being where the money is, or the PR as being where the money is, rather than the products. I think ultimately the products are just a way to, as you say, to get other people to keep putting money in. So I don't know. I think I agree with you, Angelica.
Thank you so much, Jim. If there's interest, we have a few more minutes for another round of comments. I would like while I give you some minutes to think, I would like to clarify some of the interactions in the chat. When Jim talked about the round table on digital ag, he meant the following event to this one, which is next week, where we will present the second case study, which is about the platformization of agriculture, and the case study is on bioclimate field view. So we will have that next Wednesday at the exact same schedule than today. And if you were registered for this event, you will get a notice for the event next week. But the event that has to do with the CFS, that has to do with AI and agriculture, is by the end of next year. And we were exchanging some ideas in the chat on the possibility of reboosting the CSIPM data group as a good hub to host a critical view on that we can start mobilizing to work towards acting together next year at the CFS. So would anyone like to have yeah, Miss Betty Aguti, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be in this meeting. I'm sorry my video cannot come on, but I will just talk. Thank you so much for the presentation. This is so wonderful. Personally, I really appreciate it. And the best thing for us to do now is to get ourselves informed. We need to get this information. We need to get the data so that we are prepared. They say, early warned are better prepared. So when we get this information like this, we can prepare ourselves not to be duped into these lies that are moving left, right, and center. It is true some of these theories that are brought up of the success or of the benefits of some of these technologies are just to lure the unsuspecting communities and farmers to believe. But what we need to do now as a people is, I think, to build better coalitions and bigger coalitions. We need to bring in the academia, and then we need to go down to the farmers to warn them and prepare them, because the people who are taking this data come direct and sometimes reach government, and straight they go to the farmer. And finding that the farmer is not suspecting anything, the farmer may think these people are coming to support them, and yet they are coming to siphon their data. So what we need to do, again, I repeat, we need to prepare ourselves. We need to talk to like-minded partners, for example, the academia, so that they get to know about some of these lies and deception, so that when these people come, they're already aware of what is happening. Uganda is going for an election in January, and we shall have a new lot of legislators. And to me, I think Uganda, the best thing for us now is to prepare our academic. We have eyes in the academics. So we need to talk to academia and like-minded partners, the civil society. And as soon as the members of parliament come in, we need to talk to the members of parliament as soon as they come in, so that they are prepared, so that they can legislate toward. So that is what I think. And again, thank you so much for at least preparing us in advance. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I don't see any other hands. We have been sharing some information about this event, the CFS, that's in the chat. So some of the dates on the event are being posted there if anyone is interested. On this specific, that is raising quite a bit of interest. I think that many of us will probably get together soon to discuss these issues, so we can share the information for anyone who is interested. We will probably try to boost the CSIPM data group to take a leading role on this again. Let's try. So I think we are it's a good time to start wrapping up the call. Thank you so much, Jim, for this research effort. The presentation was excellent, and I know the case study is extremely good. It's very useful for those of us who are trying to get on top of the issue, which is developing very quickly. No, so the interest of this particular case study is to understand, have a good overview of the issues, so that we can quickly have accelerate our learning curve on these particular two issues. We will share the link to the document in English and Spanish. The Spanish translation is about to be ready. It's being revised, so I will send it to all of you in a couple of days. The idea is that these case studies will be published together with a series of other case studies that focus on trade, health, gender, and that are being prepared by other allied organizations within the Center for Global Digital Justice. So there will be a specific publication, but they are already online, as it's a very useful piece of information that we should be able to use early on. So I would like to also thank very much Merin Mohammed from IT for Change. It's very late in India, but she has been listening in to all the calls. So thank you, Merin, for all the support. And I hope some of the colleagues here can also participate on the roundtable that's happening next Wednesday as a follow-up to this, because some of the issues also connect. And it would be a really good space also to keep the conversation on what are the strategic outcomes on some of the issues that we need to focus on for our planning for next year. So extremely grateful for your presence and your attention, and I hope we will be seeing each other soon. Bye-bye. And thank you so much to our interpreters, Maria and Megan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.